Stepmother forces orphan girl to marry a beggar, but the old man turns out to be the vampire king. The sky above was heavy with dark clouds, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and old wood. In the corner of a modest house, a young girl named Alara sat on the floor, her thin fingers tracing the patterns on the old rug. She had no parents, no family to call her own, only a stepmother whose words were sharper than the jagged rocks by the river. Alara's life had always been simple in the way that misfortune is simple: endless chores, meager meals, and the quiet echo of loneliness. Yet she bore it all with a patient heart, hiding her fears behind a calm face and gentle eyes. Her stepmother, Mara, was a woman of ambition and cruelty, always seeking ways to improve her own standing while dragging others down. Today, Mara had a new plan, and Alara could feel the tension in the air like a thick, choking fog. "Alara," Mara called sharply from the kitchen, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain, "come here. I have news that concerns you." Alara rose, her heart sinking. She approached the kitchen doorway, trying to steady her breathing. Mara sat at the wooden table, her hands folded neatly, but her eyes gleamed with a strange excitement. "You've grown old enough, haven't you?" Mara said, her voice almost sweet. "It is time for you to be married. There is a man who wishes to take you as his wife." Alara's stomach twisted. She had heard these words before, whispers from neighbors or passing travelers, but she had always imagined marriage as something far away, a story for other people, not her. "Who is he?" she asked softly, her voice barely above the sound of the rain. Mara smiled, but it was a smile that gave no warmth. "A man of modest means. A beggar, they say, but honest and strong. He will take you far from here, and you will have no reason to trouble me again." Alara's heart sank deeper. She did not care about wealth or status, but the thought of leaving everything she knew, of being bound to a stranger, filled her with dread. Yet she knew better than to protest. Mara's words were law in this house. The following morning, with the rain still falling in a relentless drizzle, Alara was led to the outskirts of the village. There, under the twisted branches of old oaks, she saw him. A man, hunched and clothed in rags, stood silently as if waiting for her. His hair was silver, his face lined with age, yet his eyes, dark, deep, and unnerving, held a kind of quiet power that made Alara's skin prickle. "This is him?" she asked Mara, her voice trembling. "Yes," Mara said sharply. "Take your things and go with him. You are bound by the promise you made by living under my roof." Alara stepped forward hesitantly. The man extended a hand, not rough or calloused as she had expected, but calm and steady. "Come," he said, his voice low and smooth, carrying an authority that made her pause. As they walked away from the village, the rain turned to mist, and the forest swallowed the path behind them. Alara kept her eyes down, feeling the weight of her new life pressing upon her chest. She noticed how the man moved silently, effortlessly, as if he belonged to the shadows themselves. The journey was long. They passed fields of tall, dark grass and rivers that glimmered under the clouded sky. Despite her fear, Alara could not help but notice the strange beauty around her. The way the mist curled like smoke around the ancient trees, the distant howl of a lone wolf echoing through the hills. There was something magical about this world, something that both frightened and fascinated her. By evening, they reached a manor that seemed pulled from the pages of a storybook. Its walls were dark stone, ivy crawling up like silver veins, and its towers rose into the clouds, disappearing into the mist. The door creaked open before they could reach it, and the man gestured for Alara to enter. The interior was shadowed and vast. Cobwebs hung in corners and dust lay thick on the furniture, but there was also a sense of history, of power that lingered in the air like a living thing. Candles flickered along the walls, casting long, dancing shadows that made the halls seem alive. "You may rest here," the man said, leading her to a small room at the back of the manor. "Do not wander. There are things in this house that are not kind to strangers." Alara nodded, though her curiosity burned like a secret fire. As she unpacked her few belongings, she caught herself glancing at the man. He was not unkind. There was a gentleness to his movements, a care in the way he kept the manor tidy. But there was also something distant, something hidden behind the shadow of his eyes. Night fell heavy and deep. Alara lay on the narrow bed, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the stone walls. The candlelight danced across the room, and her thoughts wandered to the man she now called husband. Who was he? Why did he feel so strange, so much larger than the world around him? A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. "Alara," the man's voice called, gentle yet firm. "Do not be afraid. Come." She rose, curious despite herself, and followed him to a room she had not seen before. There a fire burned in a large hearth, its flames crackling and bright. The man stood near it, his eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. Alara froze. There was something otherworldly about him, something that made her heart race and her mind swirl with questions. "Do not fear me," he said softly. "I am not what I seem. I know your heart, your sorrow, your courage. I know all that you have endured." Alara's breath caught. How could he know? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. "I will not hurt you," he continued, his voice low and soothing. "But there are things you must understand. This house, this life, it is not like the world you left behind. Darkness moves here and danger waits for those who are unaware. You will learn if you choose to stay." Alara nodded slowly, a mixture of fear and fascination churning inside her. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something in his gaze held her silent. It was not threatening, yet it carried a weight she could not ignore. They stood in silence, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Alara felt a strange warmth in her chest, a sense of connection she could not explain. Though she had been forced into this marriage, though the world had seemed cold and cruel, she felt safe, in a way she had never known. As she returned to her room, her mind refused to rest. She could still see his eyes, glowing faintly, holding secrets she was not yet ready to understand. The manor itself seemed to hum with life, the shadows twisting in the corners, whispering in a language she could not hear but could somehow feel. Alara lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought of the village she had left behind, of the stepmother's harsh words, and of the beggar who was not a beggar at all. Something about him was extraordinary, something that stirred a mixture of fear and longing deep within her. Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft and steady, like a lullaby for the lonely and the lost. Alara closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps, in this strange and shadowed place, she might find something more than mere survival. Perhaps she might find belonging, or even something deeper. The candle flickered once, and in the corner of the room, a shadow shifted. Alara's heart skipped a beat. She thought she saw a pair of glowing eyes watching her, and for a moment she felt the thrill of fear and the pull of something inexplicably magnetic. And then the eyes were gone, but the feeling remained. A sense that her life, the life she had always known, had ended with the rain and the walk to the manor, and that a new, uncertain fate had begun. A fate bound to the mysterious man she had been forced to marry, and to the secrets he carried in his heart. Alara did not yet understand what lay ahead. She did not yet know the true nature of the man she now called her husband, nor the darkness that lingered just beyond the walls of the manor. But she felt it like a shiver running down her spine, like a whisper in the wind, that her life would never be the same. And perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, she did not want it to be. The morning after the storm, the manor was quiet. Mist lingered like a pale blanket over the garden, curling around the stone statues and twisted ivy. Alara woke to the faint smell of burning wood from the hearth and the soft, steady ticking of an ancient clock somewhere deep in the hall. She rose and walked to the window, her eyes tracing the outline of the trees in the fog. The world outside seemed distant, as if she had been placed in a dream she could not yet wake from. Her thoughts wandered to the man she had married. Though she had only known him for a single day, she could not stop thinking about his eyes, the way they seemed to see right into her, holding both mystery and a strange warmth. She remembered the faint glow she had glimpsed in the shadows, the feeling that he carried secrets she was not yet ready to understand. A soft knock on the door drew her attention. "Ilara," the man's voice called, smooth and calm. "Come, breakfast is ready." She followed him down the long, shadowed corridor, the walls lined with portraits of people whose faces seemed to watch her as she passed. Each painting carried a sense of history, of lives lived long ago, yet the eyes in them seemed alive, almost sentient. Ilara shivered, but she held her head high, determined not to let fear take root. The man, sitting at the head of a large wooden table, gestured for her to sit. The table was set simply but elegantly, with bowls of warm porridge and cups of herbal tea. He poured her tea with careful hands, the steam rising in delicate spirals. "Eat," he said softly, though his tone carried a command that was impossible to resist. Ilara took the cup and sipped. The tea was bitter, yet soothing, and warmth spread through her chest. She glanced at him, noticing the way he moved with quiet grace, how every gesture seemed purposeful yet gentle. "Thank you," she said softly. "You are welcome," he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "There are things you must know about this place, about me, and about the life you have entered." Ilara's heart quickened. She had felt this coming, yet hearing the words aloud made the weight of it real. "I am ready to learn," she said. He nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Good, but first you must understand the rules of this house. The manor is alive in ways you cannot yet see. The walls hold memories, the shadows hold voices, and not all who wander near us are friendly." Ilara frowned. "I do not understand." "You will in time," he said, his eyes holding hers. "But you must trust me and follow my instructions, for your safety and for the safety of this house." The rest of the morning passed in careful instruction. He showed her which rooms she could enter, which corridors were dangerous, and how to navigate the manor without angering its unseen inhabitants. He spoke of the forest outside, of creatures that moved in the night, and of magic that lingered in the air like dust. Ilara listened closely, fascinated and fearful in equal measure. By midday, curiosity overcame caution. Ilara wandered into the library, a vast room filled with shelves that stretched to the ceiling. Ancient tomes lay stacked on tables, their covers worn and their pages yellowed with age. She ran her fingers along the spines, feeling the weight of centuries in her hands. "You like books," the man said behind her. Ilara jumped slightly and turned. He was watching her, standing in the doorway, a small smile on his face. I've always loved stories," she said. "Stories make the world bigger even if life is small." He nodded thoughtfully. "Stories are truth disguised, and some truths are dangerous." Ilara frowned. "Dangerous? How?" "Because they change people," he said simply. "They open doors in the mind, in the heart, doors that cannot be closed." She stared at him, trying to read his expression. There was something in his words, a warning and a promise all at once. She realized that he, too, carried stories, stories he did not yet wish to tell her. The afternoon passed in quiet study. Ilara explored the library further, discovering books about herbs and healing, about old rituals, and about creatures she had only ever heard of in whispers. The man watched her from a distance, his gaze following her with careful attention, as if measuring her courage, her intelligence, and her spirit. As evening fell, a soft light from the setting sun filtered through the high windows. The manor took on a golden glow, but the shadows in the corners deepened, curling around the edges of the room like silent watchers. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. "Do you feel it?" he asked suddenly, his voice close to her ear. "Feel what?" she whispered. "The house, it is alive," he said. "It remembers, it listens, and it judges. You must be careful." Ilara nodded, unsure if she believed him, yet unable to ignore the feeling of being watched, of walking in a place older and wiser than herself. Dinner that night was quiet. The man's movements were precise. The way he served the meal, poured the drinks, and set the table reflected a life lived with order and purpose. Yet there was an underlying softness to him, a patience that made Alara's chest tighten. She could sense the loneliness behind his careful control, and though she was wary, she felt a strange pull toward him. After dinner, they sat by the hearth. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Alara watched the man, noticing the way his eyes glimmered in the firelight. "Tell me about yourself," she said softly. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet," he replied. "Some truths must be earned, not demanded. But know this, I am not what I seem. The life you have entered, it is far larger than you imagine." Alara felt a thrill of both fear and excitement. She wanted to know, to understand, to see the world through his eyes, yet she also sensed the danger in doing so. She realized that her life was changing, that the world she had known was slipping away like mist, leaving her in the shadow of something immense, something powerful. Night fell fully, and the manor grew quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside. Alara lay in her small room, the candlelight flickering across the walls. She could hear the faint sound of movement in the corridors, soft steps, almost like a heartbeat. She felt both frightened and alive, as if the house itself were breathing around her. She could not stop thinking about the man, about the way he had looked at her, the soft intensity in his voice, and the glow in his eyes that had made her feel both safe and vulnerable. She wondered about the life he had led before her, about the secrets he carried, and about the darkness that lingered just beyond the walls of the manor. A sudden sound made her sit upright. A book had fallen from the shelf, landing open on the floor. Alara's heart raced and she glanced toward the door. The man stood there silent, watching her. "You are curious," he said softly, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I am," she admitted. "I cannot help it." "That is good," he said. "Curiosity is strength but also danger. You must learn to balance it." Alara nodded, though she did not fully understand. Something about him made her want to trust, to obey, to learn. And yet a small part of her resisted, remembering the stepmother's harsh words, the life she had left behind, and the fear of the unknown. The night grew deeper. Outside, the mist thickened and the moon rose, casting pale light through the windows. Alara felt a strange pull, as if the wind itself were calling to her, whispering secrets she could not hear. She thought of the man, of his careful instructions, and of the sense of power and danger that seemed to surround him like a cloak. And then she saw it. A shadow moved across the far wall of her room. It was not her own, nor was it caused by the candlelight. It moved with purpose, gliding across the floor, and she felt her heart skip a beat. The man stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do not be afraid," he said softly. "It is only the house testing you, but remember it is not entirely safe. The shadows watch, and not all of them are kind." Alara swallowed hard, feeling both fear and fascination. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could not yet understand, that the world was far larger, darker, and more magical than she had ever imagined. And somewhere deep in her chest, a tiny spark of excitement ignited, a hope that perhaps she could survive and even thrive in this strange, shadowed place. As she lay down to sleep, the candle flickered one last time. Outside, the mist swirled like living silver, and Alara felt the pull of the unknown, the promise of secrets yet to be revealed, and the faint, thrilling sensation that her life was no longer entirely her own. And in the silence, she thought she heard a whisper. Not a voice, not a sound, but a feeling, soft and insistent, that told her. Alara sat by the window in her small chamber, staring out at the forest that surrounded the estate. The trees swayed with the wind, and the shadows between them seemed alive, stretching and curling like dark fingers. Despite the fear that lingered in her chest, She felt a strange pull to the unknown, a curiosity that refused to be silenced. Her thoughts, inevitably, returned to the man she had been forced to marry. Though he had introduced her carefully to the manor and its mysteries, he remained a puzzle. Every glance, every word, every subtle movement hinted at secrets he would not yet share. The glow in his eyes, the quiet authority, and the soft care he showed her all combined to form an image of someone powerful, someone extraordinary. Suddenly, a sound broke the quiet. It was soft, almost imperceptible, a faint rustle from the corridor outside. Alara's heart skipped a beat. She rose slowly and approached the door. "Who is there?" she asked softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Only I," came the calm reply, and the man stepped into the room. He was no longer the old beggar she had been told to marry, though his face remained composed and solemn. There was a strength in his presence, a quiet command that made the air itself seem to shift around him. "Alara," he said, his voice gentle yet firm, "there is something I must show you, something you must understand if you are to remain here safely." She followed him down the corridor, the manor silent around them. The shadows seemed to move at the edges of her vision, and she could feel the weight of the house's history pressing down upon them. He led her to a hidden staircase, narrow and spiraling, descending into darkness. "What is this place?" Alara whispered, her voice echoing slightly against the stone walls. "It is a part of the manor few see," he said. "It holds the truth of my life, of the life I have hidden for centuries." At the bottom of the staircase they entered a vast chamber, larger than any room in the visible manor. Candles burned along the walls, their flames reflected in mirrors that seemed impossibly old. In the center of the room, a figure stood before a large, ornate mirror. The man turned to Alara and spoke. "Look," he said simply. Alara's eyes widened. The reflection in the mirror was not the old beggar she had met, but a man of striking presence, with sharp features and eyes that gleamed like polished onyx. His hair was dark and flowing, his posture regal, his aura commanding yet magnetic. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine, a mixture of awe and fear that left her breathless. I don't understand," she whispered. "This is not the man I married." He smiled faintly, a shadow of sadness in his expression. "I am the same man," he said, "but this is the form I wear when the world does not need me hidden. The truth is, I am no ordinary man. I am the king of a people long forgotten, a ruler exiled and cursed. The beggar you saw was a mask, a protection, and a test." Alara stepped closer, her mind struggling to grasp his words. "A king, oh, a vampire king?" she asked, the words tasting strange and unreal on her tongue. He inclined his head. "Yes, but I am not what the stories say. I do not feed on the careless. I rule in shadow to protect my people and my home. The mask was necessary to keep you safe, to see if you could endure the life you now lead without fear and without judgment." Alara's chest tightened. She felt a mixture of fear, fascination, and something she could not name, a pull toward him that was more than admiration, more than curiosity. Why show me this now?" "Because," he said, his eyes meeting hers, "the world outside these walls grows dangerous. There are forces that seek my throne, those who would harm you, and those who would drag me into a war I am not ready to fight. You must know the truth to stand beside me." The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. Alara's mind raced with questions, yet she felt a strange clarity in his presence. Though she had been forced into this marriage, though she had feared him at first, she now saw a depth to his character, a complexity that fascinated her. He was both fierce and gentle, powerful and restrained, and she realized that her life had been forever altered by him. He stepped closer, and she felt the pull of his presence. It was not threatening but magnetic, drawing her toward him despite the uncertainty that danced in her heart. "There is more," he said softly, "than you can yet see. My people, my kingdom, and the danger that surrounds us, it is vast and old, and soon you will need to choose." Will you stay here beside me and learn the truth of this world? Or will you retreat to the life you once knew, leaving me to face it alone? Elara swallowed hard. She felt a mixture of fear and courage, of longing and hesitation. She thought of the life she had left behind, the quiet village, the stepmother's harsh words, the simple routines that had defined her existence. Yet she also thought of the manor, the man, and the strange beauty of the world he had shown her. She realized that she could not return to her old life. The pull of this world and of him was too strong. I will stay, she said finally, her voice steady. I want to understand. I want to help if I can. He inclined his head, a small smile touching his lips. Then you must be brave. The path ahead is not easy. Shadows will test you, and the choices you make will shape both our fates. Elara felt a thrill of fear and excitement. She realized that she had entered a life larger than she had ever imagined, a life filled with magic, danger, and a connection to a man who was more than mortal. For the next days, the man Kale, as he finally allowed her to call him, taught her about the manor, the history of his people, and the subtle ways the world moved around them. Elara learned to navigate the hallways, to sense the presence of creatures lurking in the shadows, and to read the signs of magic in the air. She found herself growing stronger, more confident, more aware of the world beyond the village she had known. And all the while, the connection between them deepened. Kale's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. His voice carried an intimacy that left her heart fluttering, and his presence was both protective and demanding. Elara realized that she had never met anyone like him, someone so complex, so powerful, and yet capable of tenderness and patience. One evening, as the sun set and the mist crept through the gardens, Kale led her to the forest near the manor. The trees rose like silent sentinels, and the shadows stretched long and strange in the fading light. He stopped at a small clearing where the moonlight touched the earth like silver silk. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice low and filled with something she could not name. "Elara," he said, his eyes dark and compelling, "there are forces in this world that seek to destroy what we hold dear. I cannot face them alone, and yet I fear what I might become if I lose control." Elara looked up at him, sensing the struggle in his expression. She saw the weight of centuries in his eyes, the loneliness, the restraint, and the desire for something beyond power, something human, something shared. "You are not alone," she said softly. "I will stand with you. I trust you." He looked at her, and for a moment the mask of the old beggar, the careful control, fell away completely. She saw the man beneath, the king, the protector, the being who carried the weight of his people and his own soul. And in that instant, she felt a bond that transcended fear, a connection that spoke of loyalty, courage, and the possibility of love. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint glow of the moon. Elara felt her heart beat faster, a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. She realized that she had crossed a threshold, leaving behind the girl who had been forced into marriage, stepping into a life of danger, magic, and intimacy with a man unlike any other. And then, without warning, the forest shifted. Shadows moved faster, darker shapes pressing against the edge of the clearing. Kale's expression hardened, his senses alert, and Elara felt the first real taste of the danger he had warned her about. "They are coming," he whispered, his voice tense but calm. "You must stay behind me, trust me, and do not move unless I tell you." Elara's heart pounded, but she nodded. She could see the strength in him, the precision and the control. She realized that though he was powerful, he also relied on her courage, on her willingness to stand with him. And she found that, despite fear, she was ready to face whatever came next. The shadows crept closer, and the wind howled through the trees, carrying the promise of battle, of tests, and of revelations yet to come. Elara felt the pull of destiny, of love, and of a world that was far larger than she had ever imagined. And as she stood beside Kale, the man who had hidden his true self for centuries, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The night stretched before them, filled with whispers, shadows, and the faint, thrilling hint of danger. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, eyes watched, waiting, as the story of Alara and Kale began to unfold in ways that would change both their lives forever. The forest was quiet, but tension hung in the air like a thick fog. The moon, full and silver, cast pale light across the twisted branches and darkened paths. Alara stood beside Kale, her hand brushing against his sleeve as they faced the shadows that had emerged from the edge of the trees. She could see the determination in his eyes, the quiet strength that had drawn her to him from the moment she first saw him. "You are ready," he said softly, his voice both command and comfort. "Do not let fear guide you. Trust yourself and trust me." Alara nodded. She had grown since arriving at the manor, stronger, braver, and more certain of her own will. The girl who had been forced into a strange marriage was gone. Now she stood as someone who could face the unknown and fight alongside the man she had come to care for deeply. The shadows moved closer, black shapes that seemed to twist and pulse like living smoke. Kale stepped forward, his posture regal and commanding. His eyes glimmered with power, reflecting the moonlight, and for the first time, Alara saw the full extent of his strength. He was not merely a man hiding behind an old mask. He was a ruler, a protector, and a force of nature that demanded respect. But there was more than power in his gaze. There was care, restraint, and something almost human, a vulnerability that Alara had glimpsed before, and which now made her chest ache with emotion. "Stay close," Kale said, his hand brushing hers briefly. The contact sent a shiver down her spine, and yet it grounded her. The shadows began to solidify, revealing themselves as beings of darkness, creatures that moved with unnatural speed and intent. They were not mindless, but purposeful, drawn by the ancient power that Kale carried and the light that Alara brought into his life. Kale did not hesitate. With a flick of his hand, the shadows recoiled, as if afraid to touch him. His presence alone commanded them, but he did not fight recklessly. He moved with precision, protecting Alara while keeping the creatures at bay. Alara watched him, awe and admiration mingling with fear. She realized how much he had carried alone, the centuries of solitude and caution, the weight of his people's history pressing down on him. And yet he had chosen to trust her, to include her in his world, and that trust gave her courage beyond what she had known she possessed. A particularly large shadow lunged toward them, and Kale shifted, ready to strike. But Alara, remembering his teachings and the lessons of the manor, stepped forward. She raised her hand and whispered the incantation he had taught her, a small spell meant to repel darkness. To her astonishment, the shadow froze, then dissolved into mist. Kale looked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and pride. "You are stronger than you realize," he said, his voice softening. "You have the courage and wisdom of someone far older than you appear. I am proud of you." Alara's heart fluttered at his words. For the first time, she felt seen not as an orphan or a burden, but as someone capable, worthy, and trusted. Her chest tightened with emotion, and she realized that the bond between them had grown into something deeper than she had ever expected. The remaining shadows hissed and lunged, but together they moved as one. Kale's strength and her growing power combined to repel the creatures, forcing them back into the darkness from which they had come. When the last shadow dissolved, silence fell over the forest once more. Kale turned to her, his expression soft but intense. "You have proven yourself tonight, Alara, but this is only the beginning. The threats are not gone, and my people's safety depends on what we do next." Alara nodded, her eyes shining. "I am ready. I will stand with you. Whatever comes, I will not run." He studied her for a moment, and then, without warning, he drew her into a close embrace. The warmth of his presence, the solidity of his arms, and the depth of his gaze left her breathless. She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the life beneath the centuries of strength and caution. "You have changed my life," he whispered. "You have brought light into centuries of shadow. I cannot imagine facing the future without you." Alara's hands pressed against his chest. "And I cannot imagine a life without you," she admitted softly. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth. In the quiet of the moonlit forest, they stood together, two souls bound by trust, courage, and the unspoken promise of love. The following days were filled with preparation. Kale led Alara into the hidden city beneath the forest, a place she had never imagined existed. Towering stone structures, glowing crystals, and winding streets stretched beneath the roots of the trees. The city was inhabited by Kale's people, creatures of both beauty and strength, who had lived hidden from the world for centuries. Alara was welcomed with cautious respect. She saw the fear and reverence in their eyes when they looked at Kale, but she also saw admiration for her courage. She realized that she had become part of something much larger than herself, a world of magic, history, and responsibility. In the heart of the city stood the throne room, a place of grandeur and shadow. Kale led her inside, and she saw the remnants of an ancient power that had been hidden from the world. The throne, carved from dark stone and engraved with symbols she did not yet understand, seemed to hum with energy. "This is my duty," Kale said, his voice echoing in the hall. "And now yours as well. You have the choice to return to the safety of the manor or to stand with me and face what is coming." Alara stepped forward, her hand brushing the throne lightly. "I choose to stay," she said firmly. "I will face it with you," he smiled, a mixture of relief and deep emotion. "Then together, we will restore balance and protect our people. But there is one more thing you must understand." He told her the story of the curse that had kept him hidden for centuries, of rival factions that sought to claim his throne, and of the responsibilities he carried as a ruler. Alara listened, absorbing every word, and realized the magnitude of what she had chosen. Yet she felt no fear. Instead, she felt purpose, courage, and a deep connection to the man beside her. The night of the eclipse arrived. The sky darkened as the moon passed into shadow, bathing the hidden city in a crimson glow. Kale and Alara stood at the balcony of the throne room, overlooking the city and the forests beyond. The wind carried a sense of anticipation, of change, and of destiny. "The eclipse strengthens the magic of the land," Kale said, his voice low and solemn. "It is the moment when shadows can be confronted and the past can be set right. Tonight, we reclaim what was lost and face what has been hidden." Alara took his hand, feeling the warmth and steadiness of him. "We face it together," she said. "Yes," he replied, his gaze intense and unwavering. "Together." As the eclipse reached its peak, shadows emerged once more, but this time Kale and Alara stood side by side. Their combined strength, trust, and courage repelled the darkness, restoring balance to the hidden city and affirming Kale's place as its ruler. When the light returned, the city was calm, the people safe, and the threat gone for now. Alara looked at Kale, seeing not only the king, but the man who had revealed his true self to her, who had trusted her, and who had allowed her to become part of his life. "You have changed everything," Kale said, his hand brushing her cheek. "And in doing so, you have changed me. I am no longer a king who walks alone." Alara smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and joy. "And I am no longer a girl who runs from life," she said. "I am someone who stands, who fights, and who loves." He drew her into a gentle embrace, and for the first time in centuries, Kale felt a sense of peace. The shadows of the past had been faced, the bonds of trust had been strengthened, and the promise of the future stretched before them like the first rays of dawn breaking through darkness. As they stood together, the hidden city quiet beneath the moonlight, Alara realized that her journey, from orphan to reluctant bride to trusted companion, had led her to something she had never expected, a life filled with love, courage, and a shared destiny. And Kale, once alone and hidden behind centuries of caution, felt the weight of centuries lift. In Alara, he had found not just a partner but a light that would guide him, challenge him, and remind him of what it meant to be human, to love, and to be loved. The night ended not with fear but with hope, a new beginning. The shadows had been confronted, the past had been acknowledged, and the future awaited them, uncertain, vast, and filled with promise. And in the quiet of the hidden city, beneath the silver light of the moon and the first glow of the returning sun, two hearts stood united, ready to face whatever the world had in store. Alara knew, as she held Kale's hand and looked into his eyes, that she had found her place, her purpose, and her love. And Kale knew, as he gazed back at her, that he had found not only a companion, but a reason to hope, to trust, and to live again. Together, they stepped into the dawn, leaving the shadows behind, and embracing a life that was larger, brighter, and far more extraordinary than either could have imagined.